66 million years ago, a rock the size of a mountain tore through the vacuum of space, racing toward a blue planet rich with life. Its destination, the Yucatan Peninsula. In our timeline, this impact changed everything. It created wildfires, dust clouds and winters that killed the mighty dinosaurs, paving the way for mammals and eventually humans to rise. But in this timeline, it never hits. The asteroid slips past Earth by mere thousands of kilometers, to cosmic scales, a hair's breadth, and just like that, a single twist of fate spares the world's most powerful creatures from annihilation. The age of dinosaurs, what scientists call the Mesozoic Era, does not end. Instead, it continues and evolves. In the dense jungles of what is now South America, a herd of massive sauropods moves slowly through misty ferns, their long necks swaying as they feed on treetop leaves. Above them, pterosaurs wheel through the humid air, calling out in sharp, echoing screeches. Apex predators like Tyrannosaurus rex still rule the northern continent, stalking herds of hadrosaurs across open floodplains. Life is not peaceful, is fierce, and survival is constant, but life is thriving. And somewhere, quietly, deep in the underbrush, small creatures with fur and large eyes continue to scurry. Rodents, marsupials, tiny primates, they still exist, but they are far from dominant. In this world, they are the sideshow. Their fate is not extinction, but neither is it ascendance. Millions of years pass. The dinosaurs do not remain frozen in time. Evolution continues its endless march. Some species die out naturally, others adapt. A group of theropods, those predators like raptors, begins to grow smaller, faster, and smarter. Their feathers thicken, their eyes sharpen. They live in tight family groups. They begin using tools, simple ones at first, stones, branches. The line between animal and intelligence begins to blur in the swamps of what is now Southeast Asia. A species of feathered dinosaur called Sauriavus, mentari, evolves. It is no taller than a modern-day child, but its brain is larger than that of any other dinosaur. It communicates using high-pitched rhythmic sounds. It builds nests, not only for laying eggs, but for shelter, for storage. It begins to observe patterns, the way prey behaves, the changing of seasons, the best time to cross a river. It begins to remember. Meanwhile, across the globe, climate shifts reshape continents, mountain ranges rise, ice sheets advance and retreat. But without the asteroid impact, Earth's biosphere remains warm and stable for much longer. Forests stretch farther. Grasslands are smaller. There is no ice age. Mammals, though still evolving, never developed the upper hand. There are no saber-tooths, no mammoths. Apes remain small, tree-bound creatures, observers of a world ruled by scales and claws. 10 million years ago, Sauriavus descendants begin to dominate their regions. They form tribes. They craft tools from obsidian, from bone, from the teeth of their enemies. They wear feathers not for warmth, but for symbolism, for power. They begin to bury their dead. 5 million years ago, they tame fire. It is a revolution. With fire comes protection, warmth, and cooked food. Their bodies change, their communities grow. Language becomes richer, no longer just warning calls or mating cries, but shared stories, passed down through generations. They are not human, but they are something else, something new. A civilization, ancient and reptilian, is beginning. Kheriis was not born into leadership. She hatched in the midst of a long dry season, when food was scarce and many of the young did not survive. Her clutch, part of the highland mentari tribes, was known for their silence and their patience. They hunted with nets woven from vines, laying in wait for hours, sometimes days. Their enemies called them the stone shadows. Kheriis was different. She was smaller, lighter, and curious beyond measure. While others learned to stalk prey, she lingered near the embers of the fire pits, listening to the stories of the elders. She learned every tale, every symbol, every rhythm of the drums, and she began to question. Why did the moons move as they did? Why did fire rise in the wet season more than the dry? What made the great beasts fear certain sounds? Her mind did not seek survival, it sought understanding. When Kheriis was just 5 cycles old, still a fledgling by her tribe's standards, she wandered far beyond the known perimeter of the clutch's territory. It was forbidden. Beyond lay the forest ruled by the Prehistoric, a rival clutch known for violence and feather-burning rituals. That she went anyway. For 3 days, the clutch assumed she was dead. But on the fourth, she returned not with prey, but with an object. It was a disk of polished black stone, perfectly round, with a hole through the center. On its surface were carved strange marking symbols, not used by the mentari, nor any known clutch. Thari had found ruins, not of her people. No clutch claimed the area, but someone, something, had once shaped stone with intent, had carved symbols with a purpose. She spoke to the elders, pleaded with them to send an expedition. Some scoffed, others feared, but a few believed. A small group followed Thari back to the ruins. What they found there would forever change the course of Sauriavus civilization. Massive stone rings, partially buried, formed perfect circles in the earth. Beneath moss and root, large pillars were uncovered, etched with patterns some resembling stars, others beasts, with features unlike any known reptile. There were no bones, no tools, just design, geometry, and silence. It was the first sign that other intelligent species may have walked the earth before them, perhaps an offshoot of their kind, perhaps something else entirely. For Thari it was proof that civilization was not only possible, it had already happened. The question was, could it happen again, by their own claws? Her rise was swift. Her voice, once dismissed as naive, became the song of possibility. Younglings repeated her name, elders recited her visions. She spoke of unitine just within a clutch, but among clutches. No more border skirmishes, no more raiding and retaliation. She called for the first gathering of clutches, a summit, beneath the twin-rooted trees of Ibarra Valley. 7 clutches responded. 2 came with open minds, 3 with weapons, 1 with spies. Thari met them all without fear. For 12 nights, the valley echoed with debate, with challenge, with performance. She told them of the ruins, of the symbols, of a time beyond claw and fang. She argued not for peace alone, but for knowledge, for the shared pursuit of meaning beyond mere survival. It worked. An alliance was formed. Fragile, but real. They called themselves the Circle of Flame, a name both honoring the fire that defined their kind and the stone circle that sparked their vision. From that moment, history moved faster. Stone carving became a sacred art. A standard writing system was adopted across the allied clutches. Based on Kheriis' memory of the ancient symbols, trade routes were established, not just of goods, but of ideas. Firebinders from the eastern mountains shared their techniques for smelting copper. Swamp clutches brought medicine extracted from mold and frog skin. Highlanders offered dyes and pigments for recording history on stone tablets. The circle grew. In less than 500 years, a city rose in the heart of Ibarra Valley. Not huts, not towers, but monuments, triangular spires with inscribed histories, platforms for stargazing, gardens shaped to reflect constellations. They called the city Takora, which meant root of memory, and Thari, though she never called herself a queen, was its undisputed founder. She died in her 40th year, a long life for a Sauriavus, surrounded by flames, songs, and the tears of every clutch in the circle. But her vision did not die. Her disciples became architects, philosophers, and navigators. Her name was etched into the sacred calendar, celebrated every cycle under the full moon. And beyond Takora, other cities began to rise, some peaceful, others envious. Not all agreed with Kheriis' ideals. As knowledge spread, so too did ambition. Some clutches began to see the past, not as a guide, but as a weapon. If someone had built before, perhaps they had weapons, power secrets, and perhaps those secrets were buried still, in the northern cliffs. Beneath layers of ash and lava rock, explorers uncovered bones, massive, thick-skulled skeletons of long-dead mammals, unlike any Sauriavus had ever seen. The scholars called them the Aura beasts, hair-covered, warm-blooded, and possibly intelligent. This was impossible, they argued. Mammals were scavengers, vermin. What if the ancient ruins were not made by reptiles, but by them? The unity Thari built began to crack. Thari was not born into leadership. She hatched in the midst of a long dry season, when food was scarce and many of the young did not survive. Her clutch, part of the highland mentari tribes, was known for their silence and their patience. They hunted with nets woven from vines, laying in wait for hours, sometimes days. Their enemies called them the Stone Shadows. Thari was different. She was smaller, lighter, and curious beyond measure. While others learned to stalk prey, she lingered near the embers of the fire pits, listening to the stories of the elders. She learned every tale, every symbol, every rhythm of the drums. and she began to question. Why did the moons move as they did? Why did fire rise in the wet season more than the dry? What made the great beasts fear certain sounds? Her mind did not seek survival, it sought understanding. When Kheri was just 5 cycles old, still a fledgling by her tribe's standards, she wandered far beyond the known perimeter of the Clutch's territory. It was forbidden. Beyond lay the forest ruled by the Prehistoric, a rival Clutch known for violence and feather-burning rituals. She went anyway, for 3 days. The Clutch assumed she was dead, but on the 4th, she returned not with prey, but with an object. It was a disk of polished black stone, perfectly round, with a hole through the center. On its surface were carved strange marking symbols, not used by the mentari, nor any known Clutch. Kheri had found ruins, not of her people, no. Clutch claimed the area, but someone, something, had once shaped stone with intent, had carved symbols with a purpose. She spoke to the elders, pleaded with them to send an expedition. Some scoffed, others feared, but a few believed. A small group followed Kheri back to the ruins. What they found there would forever change the course of Sauriavus civilization. Massive stone rings, partially buried, formed perfect circles in the earth. Beneath moss and root, large pillars were uncovered, etched with patterns, some resembling stars, others beasts, with features unlike any known reptile. There were no bones, no tools, just design, geometry, and silence. It was the first sign that other intelligent species may have walked the earth before them, perhaps an offshoot of their kind, perhaps something else entirely. For Kheri it was proof that civilization was not only possible, it had already happened. The question was, could it happen again, by their own claws? Her rise was swift. Her voice, once dismissed as naive, became the song of possibility. Younglings repeated her name. Elders recited her visions. She spoke of unity, not just within a Clutch, but among Clutches. No more border skirmishes, no more raiding and retaliation. She called for the first gathering of Clutches, a summit, beneath the twin-rooted trees of Ibarra Valley. 7 Clutches responded. 2 came with open minds, 3 with weapons, 1 with spies. Kheri met them all without fear. For 12 nights, the valley echoed with debate, with challenge, with performance. She told them of the ruins, of the symbols, of a time beyond claw and fang. She argued not for peace alone, but for knowledge, for the shared pursuit of meaning beyond mere survival. It worked. An alliance was formed, fragile but real. They called themselves the Circle of Flame, a name both honoring the fire that defined their kind and the stone circle that sparked their vision. From that moment, history moved faster. Stone carving became a sacred art. A standard writing system was adopted across the allied Clutches. Based on Kheri's memory of the ancient symbols, trade routes were established not just of goods, but of ideas. Firebinders from the eastern mountains shared their techniques for smelting copper. Swamp Clutches brought medicine extracted from mold and frogskin. Highlanders offered dyes and pigments for recording history on stone tablets. The circle grew. In less than 500 years, a city rose in the heart of Ibarra Valley. Not huts, not towers, but monuments, triangular spires with inscribed histories, platforms for stargazing, gardens shaped to reflect constellations. They called the city Tokara, which meant root of memory, and Kheri, though she never called herself a queen, was its undisputed founder. She died in her 40th year, a long life for a Sauriavus, surrounded by flames, songs, and the tears of every Clutch in the circle. But her vision did not die. Her disciples became architects, philosophers, and navigators. Her name was etched into the sacred calendar, celebrated every cycle under the full moon. And beyond Tokara, other cities began to rise, some peaceful, others envious. Not all agreed with Kheri's ideals. As knowledge spread, so too did ambition. Some Clutches began to see the past, not as a guide, but as a weapon. If someone had built before, perhaps they had weapons, power, secrets. And perhaps those secrets were buried still in the northern cliffs. Beneath layers of ash and lava rock, explorers uncovered bones, massive, thick-skulled skeletons of long-dead mammals, unlike any Sauriavus had ever seen. The scholars called them the Arabists, hair-covered, warm-blooded, and possibly intelligent. This was impossible, they argued. Mammals were scavengers, vermin. What if the ancient ruins were not made by reptiles, but by them? The unity Kheri built began to crack. It began with suspicion. For 3 centuries after Kheriis' death, the circle of flame flourished. Cities rose across the southern continent, and trade routes stretched from the ice-fringed rivers of the north to the steaming jungles of the equator. The Sauriavus were no longer tribal survivors. They had become urban, literate, philosophical. But as their numbers grew, so did their disagreements. At the heart of the conflict was the era question. The bones found in the northern cliffs continued to unsettle the scholars. The aura beasts, large-brained mammals, had lived over 1 million years ago, long before any known Sauriavus civilization. Their skeletons were found in complex arrangements, sometimes buried with objects, smooth stones, shells, carved wood. If mammals had once created culture, then what did that mean for the reptilian supremacy the circle had always assumed? Some refused to believe it. They called the idea heresy, an insult to the flame-gifted memory of Thari. Others demanded further study. A growing faction, led by a philosopher named Varantil, proposed that the Urabists may have once ruled the earth only to fall due to inner weakness, emotion, and disorder. His warning was simple: we must not become them. That fear spread like wildfire. In the city of Tokora, once the beacon of learning, a new movement emerged, the Order of the Cold Mind. They believed that emotion, empathy, and memory were dangers, that unity had made their people soft, that the only path forward was purity, strength, order, logic. They burned the old tales, rejected the stories of Thari, claimed the flame must be redefined, not as warmth, but as cleansing fire. In response, the remaining circle cities tried to resist: diplomacy, council meetings, shared festivals, but the order grew too fast, too strong. And so began the First War. It was not fought with claws or teeth, but with engineered beasts, siege spines, and fire drakes, reptilian monsters bred in the volcanic lands of the east, their backs armored with obsidian. The city of Yunha was the first to fall. Its libraries were turned to ash, its scholars hunted. Survivors called it the night without dawn. All across the continent, alliances shifted. Clutches that once traded song and spice now sharpened obsidian blades and spoke in war tongue. The first dinosaur civilizations had entered their age of civil conflict, but from chaos rose genius. A young inventor named Kheriis, born in the neutral city of Zeven, devised a tool that changed the war: the tension bow, a launching weapon designed using knowledge from tree mechanics and shell elasticity, capable of piercing the scales of even the heaviest battle beasts from a distance. His design spread rapidly. Warfare became more strategic, more lethal. Walls grew taller, scouts flew further, and coded drum signals became standard for battlefield communication. For the first time, information moved faster than armies. But even in war, civilization matured. Some cities flourished in defiance of violence. In the west, the city of Suankit founded the Archives of Echo, a subterranean vault beneath the mountains, where all written history, neutral and unbiased, would be preserved. Away from politics, its librarians swore an oath: no claw shall hold a blade and a scroll. Elsewhere, a new religious order emerged, the Keepers of the Flame Path, who reinterpreted Kheriis' teachings not as literal truth, but as metaphor, a call for continual growth, for light over darkness. They preached peace. Many were executed. The war lasted 87 years. By the end, over a dozen cities were lost. 2 entire species of Sauriavus longifrons and Choleric were driven to extinction through targeted breeding and warfare. Entire forests were burned too. The root. And then, just as quickly, came silence. The order collapsed from within. Logic and cold reason proved brittle when exposed to hunger, to fear, to the irrational fire of life. Their leaders turned on one another, accusing betrayal, impurity, emotion. In the final year of the war, the Order's own capital, Narrated, imploded in rebellion. Its great towers, once gleaming with cold iron and glassy obsidian, were shattered by the very slaves they had once oppressed. The Circle of Flame did not return. Too much had changed. Instead, a new alliance formed, a loose federation of city-states, known as the Fractured Concord. Power was decentralized. Travel resumed. Trade reopened. But memory remained. Every city bore scars, some physical, others in stone tablets, in half-sung songs, in names no longer spoken. The war had taught the Sauriavus many things: that unity was fragile, that truth could be twisted, that fire could warm but also devour. Somewhere, in the frozen north, among the quiet cliffs where the Ura beasts had once walked, something moved. They were watching. After the smoke of the Great War cleared, the Sauriavus world stood at a fragile crossroad. The cities were no longer united by one empire, nor separated entirely into war-bound factions. The fractured concord, a decentralized web of independent city-states, held civilization together with trade, diplomacy, and fragile treaties. No one clutch could dominate the others. No dogma could rule all minds. It was not a golden age, but it was an age of curiosity, with war no longer consuming resources and attention. Eyes turned outward, beyond the jungle borders, beyond the high mountain ridges, beyond the sea. The city of Orcatal, perched on the rocky cliffs of what is now the southern coast of the Old World, became the beating heart of this new movement. Its towers were not built for war, but for sight. The Sky Temple rose from its center like a spiral horn, lined with lenses carved from translucent crystal and polished bone. It was here that the astronomer Nair of the Night Eye mapped the stars. He was born with one eye clouded by pigmented defect, many said, but in darkness he could see what others missed. Neo tracked the wandering lights above, recorded their patterns, and predicted eclipses with terrifying accuracy. He argued that the world was not flat, not domed, but curved, like the back of a nesting mother. He believed the world turned. Others scoffed. But his maps were used by the great navigators who soon followed. Among them was Thesaru, a slender, sharp-beaked Sauriavus from the archipelago of Kalandar. She was the first to design a ship with a flexible spine, in innovation that allowed vessels to shift shape with the waves, not fight them. Her ship, the Shifting Wind, sailed into storms others avoided. It crossed waters that had drowned generations, and one morning, beneath the rising twin moons, Thesaru saw land no chart had ever marked. She called it Acre. The lost east it was, vast, dry, and quiet. The soil bore strange fossils, bipedal mammals with thick joints and wide skulls. Her crew found cave systems that twisted deep underground. At first, they believed the land to be dead, but then they heard the sounds, low howls, patterns in dust, smoothed stones arranged in deliberate spirals. They left quickly, back in Orc. Debate exploded. Had they discovered descendants of the Aura beasts? Had some branch of ancient mammals survived in secret? Were they sentient? The question reopened ancient wounds. For many, it was a threat. For others, a wonder. The Concord Council ordered expeditions, but many vanished in Acre's vast deserts. Survivors spoke of shadows that tracked them. Fires lit with no source. Eyes in the dark. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in the world, progress accelerated. In the icebound city of Kuranai, inventors built the steam pump, originally designed to extract warm water from deep geothermal vents. It soon powered wheels, then presses, then carts. The industrial age of the Sauriavus had begun, not of coal and iron, but of heat, pressure, and precision-crafted ceramics. Metalwork flourished. Engineers built massive cranes along river deltas. Libraries expanded with pressed leaf books and stone spindle memory rods. Education became standardized in most major cities. Hatchlings were raised not only in nests, but in law houses, centers for logic, history, and the philosophy of flame. The balance was delicate. With technology came arrogance. With discovery came conflict. Some began to call for colonization of the Silent Lands. Others wanted contact. A few radical thinkers known as the Bridgeminds believed in something stranger, that the Ura had never truly fallen, but had gone underground, and were evolving again. Whispers spoke of towers beneath the earth, of machinery not made by claw or scale, of languages made of vibration and pulse, not sound. The cities dismissed it as fantasy, but the dreams came regardless. Hatchlings across the continent began to report similar visions, glowing tunnels, humming walls, voices in their skulls. In the city of Rahudin, a young thinker named Jetkar built a machine to measure the dreams, an early neurophonic coil that translated brainwaves into sound, and what it recorded terrified him. The voice was not Sauriavus, not mammal, not even language as they understood it, but it was deliberate, rhythmic, repeating. It said only one phrase: "We remember you." From that point forward, the Sauriavus world was split once more, not by war, not by resource, but by fear. A fear not of death, but of irrelevance. What if they were not the peak? What if they were not alone? The concord began to unravel again. Some cities pushed for secrecy, others armed themselves. Orcatal closed its harbors. Tokara's archives were sealed. Expeditions to Acre were banned officially. Unofficially, they continued. One such ship, the Ember's Edge, vanished after reaching the eastern shore. It left behind only a single fragment of its memory log, discovered months later in a fisher's net. Its final words: "They were not hiding from us, they were waiting. They came in silence, not with drums or weapons, not in towering herds or flashing displays." The first reappearance of intelligent mammals in the Sauriavus world was quiet, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. It began in the high mountains of the northwest, where thin air and constant cold kept most reptiles away. There, in the caves of Mount Risha, a group of scaled miners discovered a tunnel unlike any they had carved. Its surface was smooth, as if bored, not by claw or pick, but melted by heat. Symbols lined the walls, circles inside circles, repeating patterns of arcs and dots. The miners called for scholars. What came next was the single most important discovery since the ruins of the first flame. At the deepest end of the tunnel, resting on a raised platform of polished bone-colored material, stood a statue unlike anything known. It was upright, mammalian in posture, with forward-facing eyes, a short snout, and hands with 5 fingers. Its body was smooth and furless, its head slightly enlarged. Beneath it, etched in a language of pulses and bars, was a message. It took 7 years to translate. When the meaning was finally deciphered by the neurolinguists of Sunket, it read, "To the children of flame, we are the forgotten ones. We chose silence, not extinction. We watched, we learned, now we return." The debate erupted instantly. Was this a message from the Eurybistus? Were they truly alive, evolved, watching from the edges of the known world? If so, where were they now? Why had they hidden? The Council of the Fractured Concord convened in emergency session. Old flames of fear returned. Some argued for immediate retaliation, bury the tunnels, silence the past. Others begged for caution, for diplomacy. Scholars from the bridge mines wept with vindication, but no decisions were made in time. Because 3 weeks after the statue was uncovered, the Ura revealed themselves, not in the capital cities, not to leaders or generals. They appeared in the rural lowlands, in farming clutches, forest way stations, and forgotten ports. Short, fur-covered beings with upright posture, large eyes, and long, flexible fingers. They did not speak in words, but in signals, simple shapes, projected from devices worn on their wrists. Visual languages built on contrast and movement. They were not aggressive. They offered seeds, tools, healing salves. Some Sauriavus clutches welcomed them with curiosity. Others recoiled in horror. In the city of Jalmaris, a riot erupted when Ura envoys attempted to enter the trade district. 3 were killed, their blood thick and red. Nothing like the bright copper of the Sauriavus. The Ura did not retaliate. They simply vanished for months. Tension thickened like smoke. Then came the great broadcast, all across the Sauriavus world. In every major city and every remote outpost, a single image appeared, projected into the sky like a beacon. A Ura, standing in darkness, surrounded by light, and from every speaker, every drum tower, every neurophonic coil, the same message: you are not the first, but you may be the last. The cycle nears its end. Choose union or oblivion. Panic spread. Prophets spoke of end times. Militants called for war. And in secret rooms beneath the sky temples, ancient symbols were compared against the newest Ura codes. The parallels were undeniable. The ruins found by Thari in the First Age may not have been Sauriavus after all. They may have been Era. If that were true, then everything, the circle of flame, the great cities, the age of steam and thought, was built not on untouched ground, but atop the ashes of an older, hidden world. The council split. Half called for peace, the other for preemptive strike. A third voice, however, rose from the south. Her name was Kheriis, a young leader from the jungle city of Venka. Raised on the stories of Thari, trained in science, she had studied both Ura and Sauriavus history. She proposed a third path. We meet them not in fear, not in submission, but in understanding. Their minds may be strange, their blood different, but perhaps they, too, remember the sky rock that never came. Perhaps they asked the same questions. She sent a message, open, unencrypted, and the Ura answered. A meeting was arranged, not in a palace or a warship, But in the ancient ruins of the first flameware, Thari had once found the stone ring that began it all. There, under the watchful gaze of a million stars, the two species stood across from one another, one scaled and feathered, born of claw and fire, the other furred and soft, born of warmth and darkness. No words were spoken, but both sides understood. For the first time in 66 million years, mammal and dinosaur stood as equals, not in battle, but in memory. The future would not be easy. There would be conflict, fear, loss, but the cycle had been broken, not by domination, but by contact. The first century after contact was known as the fusion era. Though the initial meeting between the Sauriavus and the Ura had ended in peace, the path forward was anything but smooth. Two intelligent species so different in biology, culture, and philosophy were now forced to confront the truth. They shared a planet, a past, and perhaps a future. The earliest exchanges were simple. The Sauriavus brought gifts of flame-forged tools, maps of the stars, and carved memory tablets. The Ura responded with organic technology, living machines, self-repairing fabrics, and neural interfaces that responded to thought. The Ura had spent millennia underground, safe from predators, building a civilization based not on domination of nature, but on symbiosis with it. Their machines were not cold, hard metals, but flexible, bioreactive compounds. Where the Sauriavus had harnessed the heat of the earth, the Ura had harnessed its rhythm, the cycles of growth, decay, and regeneration. For many Sauriavus thinkers, it was a revelation. For others, it was a threat. In the great city of the once holy capital of Thari's dream, crowds gathered to protest what they called the softening of scale. They feared the loss of reptilian identity, tradition replaced by mammalian influence. Ura ideas spread quickly in the cities: non-hierarchical learning, open mind, neural connectivity, and the rejection of violence as a cultural instinct. And, most dangerously, they offered access to the memory field. This was the core of Ura technology, a planetary, biologically linked network of stored consciousnesses. Every Ura, upon death, could return their memories to the field. In essence, their society had no forgetting, no erasure, no lost history. The Sauriavus were both awed and horrified. Too many. Memory was sacred, but to store it eternally, to blur the line between life and death, it was too much. Some called it blasphemy, others called it immortality. The political divide worsened. Some cities like Orkoto, Suinket, and the newly formed Urasauri enclave of Henmel embraced cooperation. They developed hybrid schools, joint research stations, even shared families. Children were raised understanding both languages, the spiral code of the Uri and the drum tones of the Sauriavus. Other cities recoiled. Gelmaris, site of the first Ura killings, banned all mammalian presence. Propaganda warned of Ura brainwashing, of first-pond decay. Some extremists desecrated Ura temples and memory gardens. In the north, where the old bones of the Ura were first found, a new Sauriavus faction rose, the flame purists. They believed in a return to ancient values: strength, dominance, fire. They rejected cooperation, and worse, began to re-engineer dinosaurs, modifying ancient genomes to create beasts of war. Using both Sauriavus engineering and stolen Ura memory, they bred hybrids, massive reptilian creatures, guided by semi-sentient neural cores. These were not soldiers. They were living weapons. The purists claimed they were building a defense against future Ura invasion. But most knew the truth. They wanted control, not of the Ura, not even of the Sauriavus, of history itself. The Concord fractured again, and so began the War of Mindsnot, fought in open battlefields at first, but in philosophy, in information, in dreams. The Ura deployed memory veins of biological intelligence planted in cities, designed to connect Sauriavus citizens to shared history. Those who entered the memory veins experienced not just images, but entire lives walking in the memories of both Ura and dinosaur ancestors. Some emerged enlightened, others emerged broken. Many refused to enter at all. Then came the spark in the border city of Kolkra. A Ura teacher named Melu and her Sauriavus mate were executed by a purist tribunal for thought contagion. Their deaths were broadcast across the planet via neural signal. Within minutes, riots ignited in 17 cities. Ura memory networks pulsed with grief and rage. Sauriavus allies struck out at purist outposts, and the hybrids who had been bred, but not yet deployed, were unleashed. The skies darkened, cities burned. For the first time in recorded memory, the URA activated the quieting protocol, a planetary pulse, meant to disable all artificial technology, disrupt neural links, and silence information across all networks. It was their last resort. It worked in the silence that followed. Both species stood amidst ruins, not just physical, but emotional. The memory field had gone offline, communication collapsed, technology failed. The hybrids, without guidance, turned feral and vanished into the wilderness. The world had changed, again, but not all was lost. A small group comprised of both Sauriavus and URA had foreseen the collapse. They had preserved fragments of both societies in isolated regions, away from the main network, far from the cities. These enclaves held seeds, scrolls, DNA vaults, and most importantly, stories. They were called the Remembrance Kin. Their goal was not to rule, nor to rebuild the old world. Their goal was to create something new, something that honored memory but did not chain itself to it, that accepted difference but did not fear it, that saw history not as a weapon but as a mirror. The war had ended not with a treaty, nor with conquest, but with silence. After the quieting protocol, the world stood broken. Cities that once glowed with hybrid technology now lay still. Neural networks were quiet, biomachines withered, trade collapsed, dreams no longer echoed across minds. Memory so long preserved, archived, woven into the very essence of daily life, was reduced to whispers. As fragile as breath, it was in this silence that the Remembrance Kin emerged. They were not powerful, not many, but they had prepared. Among them were survivors of both species, Sauriavus, philosophers who had once studied URA biocognition, URA engineers who respected the wisdom of Sauriavus flametech, and a new generation of mixed-blood hatchlings, and cubs born between the two worlds. They gathered in the Valley of Still Stars, a quiet basin untouched by war, where the sky remained unclouded and the ancient ruins of both URA and dinosaur origin sat side by side. Here, they began again, not in ambition, but in intention. There were no towers, no cities, only gardens, tents, and story circles. Each evening, under torchlight and starlight, they shared stories not of gods or warlords, but of mistakes, grace, and possibility. The young learned from the old listened to the young. They remembered, not just as archivists, but as creators of meaning. They developed a new form of writing, flow script, a fusion of Aura pulse logic and Sauriavus flame etching. It could be read by eye or felt by claw. It was meant not to declare, but to invite understanding. Their philosophy was simple. The past is a garden. You do not live in it, but you grow from it. They taught three core truths. Memory is not identity. Species is not destiny. The world is not yours, it is shared. Slowly, their ideas spread, at first through travelers, then traders, and eventually through seekers from the ruined cities, orphans of war, disillusioned warriors, former leaders seeking peace. Many could not adapt, but those who stayed changed. They built the archive tree, a living structure grown from aura seed and shaped by Sauriavus flame. It housed not only history, but emotion. When one placed their hand on its core, they felt echoes, not words, but sensations of those who had come before. Forgiveness, grief, hope. It became a place of pilgrimage, but even as healing began, a question loomed. Was this sustainable? The world was still broken. The old systems were gone. Power vacuums grew in far regions. Rogue hybrids, once war beasts, had formed packs in the wilderness. Some began to breed. They were no longer tools. They were becoming their own kind. Worse fragments of the memory field had begun to reawaken. Not all Remembrance Kin believed this was good. Some feared that reactivating memory would reignite the cycle: ambition, fear, control. Others believed the future required full remembrance, or else all lessons would be lost again. The split was gentle at first. One group, the seed bearers, wanted to plant small, local memory nodes, not networked, accessible only by touch, held in villages. The other group, the Torchwardens, wanted to rebuild a new global system, carefully filtered, ethically guided by cross-species councils. Neither side was wrong, but neither could wait forever. Tensions rose, and so on the 25th cycle of the Still Star, they gathered for the trial of Flame and Stoner. Ritual debate held in the echo chamber beneath the archive tree, witnessed by hundreds, spoken in flow script and gesture. The two factions presented their visions for the future. The decision was not made by vote, it was made by silence. The crowd sat for a full day, reflecting, remembering. No shouting, no fear, only the weight of possibility. In the end, a third path was chosen, the braided way. Small, local archives would be planted, but not as storage units. They would be living gardens, cultivated by memory tenders, trained to guide minds gently, not flood them. And the global network, it would remain off, unless 3 generations, raised independently, all agreed to its return, a safeguard, a promise. And so the Remembrance Era took root. New cities, small and scattered, began to rise, built, not for defense, but for dialogue. The hybrids were approached, not as beasts, but as a new people. Some could speak, others only sang, but they were heard. The Era did not vanish, the Sauriavus did not fade. Instead, the two species stood side by side, no longer masters of the world, but participants. And in time, new stories emerged, not of what had been lost, but of what could yet be created. The Remembrance Era gave the world peace, but the new Renaissance gave it purpose. As the children of Sauriavus and Ura grew up beneath braided traditions, some with scales, some with fur, some with both, they began to ask questions their ancestors had feared to voice. Not just who are we, or what happened before us, but something deeper. What can we become? It began with art, in the city village of Nolveth. Perched atop ocean cliffs carved with memory gardens, a young hybrid named Ruli invented the scream stone, a hollow shell of obsidian that, when wind passed through it, resonated with a haunting song, echoing the emotional state of whoever carved it. Some were mournful, others laughed. Art became not just creation but translation, of feelings between species, of memories too complex for words, of visions seen not with eyes, but soul. Soon, these artistic breakthroughs bled into science, a collective known as the Melders. Engineers, dreamers, dancers, and pods merged emotion with logic. They developed a new field of study, empathic mechanics. It was no longer enough to build machines that functioned, they had to feel right, resonate with the user's rhythm. Under their guidance, tools evolved, lanterns that pulsed in response to grief, softening their light in mourning. Houses that changed shape with the season or the mood of their inhabitants. Songs that tuned medical treatments to the unique heartbeat of each being. But even as cities bloomed with shared understanding, there remained an ache beneath it all, a longing to know what lies beyond. For centuries, both Ura and Sauriavus had studied the stars. Now, with peace achieved, they looked up again, not in awe, but in hunger. The first skycraft built by a coalition of melders and ancient star mappers was called the Second Flame. It was sleek, grown from Ura biostructures, and armored with flame-hardened skeletal. It flew not by combustion, but by resonance with the planet's magnetic rhythm, lifted gently at first, then propelled with controlled pulse energy. It carried only 5 beings, to Sauriavus, to Ura, and 1 hybrid child, chosen not for rank, but for insight. Their destination was not distant stars, but the moon, that pale twin which had watched the world's every fall and rise. They made it, and there, on that ancient silver stone, they placed a single artifact, not a flag, not a claim, but a memory garden. It held no text, only living crystal, tuned to play one single memory shared by every species on Earth. A memory of 2 beings, one scaled, one furred, walking side by side into the ruins of the first flame, choosing peace. Back home, the world celebrated, but a question lingered. Was peace permanent? History, even remembered gently, taught caution. Some voices warned that exploration might awaken new threats, entities beyond Earth, unbound by memory or meaning. Others feared that growing comfort would lead to decadence, or worse, forgetting. But the new generation responded not with fear, but with philosophy. Memory is a flame not to be chained, but carried. And so, they carried it into the deep oceans, where forgotten machines of the old war still slumbered, into the polar mists, where time flowed strangely and ice sang to itself, into the void of space, where stars whispered in languages not yet heard. They did not search for conquest, they searched for companionship. They believed, truly, that if life had happened twice, first in mammals, then in reptiles, then perhaps it had happened again, elsewhere. They believed they were not alone. And if they were, they would not remain so forever. Asterisk. It came like a whisper through glass, 3 years after the second flame touched the moon and planted the memory garden. The listening array of Coronia, vast field of living crystal towers nested in the polar silence, detected something no one had expected, a rhythm, not random noise, not background starlight or the hum of solar wind, a pulse, slow and deliberate, emerging from a point beyond the Oort cloud, faint at first, like a dream halfway heard, but then it grew, shifted, became structured. The Ura were the first to recognize. It shaped out. It wasn't a language in the traditional sense. There were no words, no tones, just pressure-timed fluctuations of spatial density, arranged in prime intervals, separated by silences that matched the biological respiration, cycles of Sauriavus and Ura alike. The Melders called it the mirror signal. Its structure reflected a deep understanding, not only of physics, but of life, as both species knew it. Inside the pulse pattern, encoded in phase shifts, were resonances that matched the frequency of both the memory field and ancient Ura dream-archives. It wasn't just a message, it was a recognition. We see you. Across the world, the news spread like light across water. Some rejoiced, others fell into silence. Children sat under skylamps, tracing the stars, wondering who might be watching them, and always, the signal pulsed, patient, as if it knew the world needed time. For months, debate raged. Could this be a trap, a test? Should they respond? If so, it was the hybrid philosopher Kheriis, born of 3 lineages and raised in both jungle flamenests and aura dream gardens, who proposed a radical answer. We respond not with language, not with fire. We respond as we always have, with memory. And so began the Resonance Project. For the first time since the quieting, fragments of the old memory field were reawakened, but carefully, with ethical filtration, biological failsafes, and collective consent. No centralized intelligence, no control, only reflection. They compiled a signal that contained the story of Kheriis and the first flame, the rise and fall of the circle, the war of minds and the quieting, the remembrance era, the planting of the garden on the moon. No defense plans, no coordinates, only truth. It was not a declaration, it was a gift. The message was shaped into a spiral pulse array, encoded into the roots of a deep-orbiting satellite built from both metal and mycelium, and launched beyond the solar horizon, on a vessel named meaning bridged. The world held its breath. Days passed, then weeks, and then, the signal changed. Where once it had pulsed alone, now it echoed. A second rhythm joined it, mirrored, but altered. A reply not in words, but in music. The intervals stretched, notes curled around the original signal like vines on a tree. And at the end of the pattern came something new, a shape, projected into the minds of every being connected to a memory node. The shape was not visual, not tactile, but felt, like the memory of warmth before birth, like light on closed eyes, like welcome. The Sauriavus called it the third flame, the Ura called it the embrace beyond knowing. There was no request, no demand, only an invitation, and a single instruction repeated once: you are ready. They prepared not for conquest, nor for rescue, but for understanding. After the mirror signal's response and echo laced with music, memory, and the strange instruction, you are ready, the world changed once more, but not with fear this time, with purpose. The Ura and Sauriavus, long since woven into one living civilization, gathered their brightest minds. The skycraft engineers of Orca, the neural dream mappers of the Ura Deep Spire, the hybrid empathic pilots trained in the floating schools of Nolveth. Together, they designed a vessel that was not a ship, but a being. It was called Kheriis, a name taken from both languages. In Sauriavus, vessel of flame; in Ura, song of remembrance. In the hybrid tongue, it simply meant home beyond home. Kheriis was grown, not built, shaped from living material responsive to memory and environment. Its hull could shift with gravity, its interior pulsed with faint bioluminescence, tuned to the mental state of its crew. It dreamed with them. Only a few would go, not soldiers, not politicians, but listeners, each selected not for strength, but for balance, 1 foot in knowledge, 1 in silence. They trained for 3 cycles in deep trance environments, learning to hold themselves steady even when exposed to alien frequencies, psychic pressures, or non-linear communication. Their mission was not to reach a destination, it was to go, and to receive. On the day of departure, the whole world paused. From the valleys to the glaciers, from floating gardens to underwater observatories, millions stood in quiet, claws and hands over hearts, remembering not what had been lost, but what had been chosen. The launch was unlike any before. No fire, no roar, just a rising hum, a shimmering pulse of blue and violet as Kheriis detached from the Earth's biosphere and folded gently into the dark. And as it left, the memory garden on the moon pulsed once with golden light. Kheriis moved, not through space in the conventional sense. Its core was embedded with a form of bioquantum, thread-grown through dark matter culture and stabilized by Sauriavus flame harmonics. It followed the path the mirror signal had opened, diving into folds of space where location was not fixed, and time was a suggestion. Days passed, then weeks, and then the stars changed. The crew awoke one morning to a sky not mapped by any chart. Planets orbited in vertical spirals, light bent sideways, and ahead of them, pulsing like a memory-shaped tide, was a structure. They could not say if it was built or born. It resembled no architecture. Either species had known neither solid nor fluid. A swirling gyre of translucent matter and thought frequency, anchored to nothing yet holding space around it still. Kheriis approached with no engines. The structure pulled them in not like a trap, but like a welcome dot at its center. Light, not blinding, not harsh, a gentle radiance that spoke directly to the mind, bypassing words. Each crew member heard something different. One heard the voice of their mother, another, the call of stars from their youth, a third, silence but warm and complete. Then came the image, a circle, then a spiral, then to hands or claws touching, and a question. What is your purpose? The crew did not answer aloud. They simply opened the archive. Not the facts, not the maps or machines, but the feelings of survival, of war, of forgiveness, of trying again, and again, and again. And the light pulsed in return. A single rhythm, the same one that had started everything. A new signal, but this time not a whisper, a song. And in that song, the crew of Kheriis understood. They were not alone. They had never been. The cosmos was not silent. It was waiting. They were not greeted with flags, nor banners, nor parades. They were greeted with understanding, the structure, the one that sang, the one that reached across time and darkness too. Echo Earth's long quiet prayers was not a ship, not a city, and not a being in the way the Sauriavus or Ura understood being. It was called, simply, the weave, not by voice, not in words, but through resonance vibrations in emotion, texture, and memory. The weave was a convergence point, a gathering of species that had long left behind war, ego, even identity as the Earthborn knew it. Their forms were diverse, some biological, some photonic, some fluid clusters of intelligent gas. Others had no fixed form at all, yet all shared one trait. They remembered, not just their own pasts, but the pasts of others. The weave was a collective, a tapestry of civilizations bound together not by conquest or trade, but by exchange of memory, empathy, and continuity. The crew of Kheriis entered cautiously, bearing their story like a fragile gem. At first, they observed. They saw species sharing ancestral griefs through waves of songlight. They watched young minds, hatchlings, spores, saplings float in shared hallucinations designed to teach trust. They felt whole planets pulse with the rhythm of decision-making. Every voice accounted for. No council, no government. Just shared rhythm. And when the time came, they were invited to share. The crew projected Earth's saga, the long arc of survival from fire to silence to flame again. The first memory they chose was not the Great War, nor the contact with the Ura, but the birth of storytelling, Thari by the fire, drawing circles in the dust. The weave responded with a slow unfolding images from 100 worlds, each echoing the same moment, a tree that sang stories into its leaves, a liquid species that carved memories into tuppy flow, a crystalline people who danced each child's birth into the rings of their planet's orbit, different shapes, same instinct, story, connection, hope. The crew wept not in sorrow, but in release. For all their struggles, their fears, their nipness, they had found others who knew what it meant to remember. But their arrival also brought a ripple. A new presence in the weave meant new strands added to the tapestry. The Earth's memory, dense, painful, beautiful, began to affect the whole. Some members of the weave were cautious. Earth, after all, had nearly destroyed itself multiple times. It had birthed species that warred with one another, that forgot, that had to relearn peace again and again. Was such a world ready to join the rhythm? The crew had no answer, but they had one act left to give. They offered not a treaty, not a vow, but a cutting-hard living seed of Kheriis itself, encoded with the dreams of Ura, Sauriavus, and hybrid minds. A ship seed, yes, but also a memory forest, meant to grow only where it was welcome. And the weave accepted. The seed was planted at the convergence point, and with it, the earth joined not just as a guest, but as a strand, a living thread in the infinite cloth of sentient memory. Kheriis did not return to Earth immediately. The crew chose to remain, to learn, to listen, and to serve as the first translators of cosmic culture for their world. Their thoughts were relayed home through resonance beacons, embedded into the moon's memory garden, now blooming in silver-leafed light visible from Earth's surface. Back home, the news changed. Everything. The world did not explode in chaos. It exhaled. For the first time in history, the people of Earth knew they were part of something larger, not ruled by it, not beneath it, but belonging within it. Not special, not chosen, but connected. And so a new age dawned, not of steam, or fire, or even fusion, but of weaving worlds. Once focused inward, began to orient outward, with humility. Memory gardens were planted in orbiting stations. Flamestone monoliths were carried into space by living ships. And across continents, across oceans, across species, the question was, no longer, will we survive? But, what will we contribute to the story of all life? The Earth no longer burned with conquest. It glowed with memory. 1,000 years passed after the integration into the weave. They were not years of silence or stagnation, but of steady unfolding. No empire rose. No war returned. Instead, Earth became known as the keeper world, a place where memory was not merely recorded, but lived. From the jungles of old Sauriavus flame nests to the crystal-laced dream domes of Ura ancestry, the planet had transformed into a living archive. It did not just hold knowledge, it breathed it. Here, all beings were taught the three questions at birth. What have you inherited? What will you change? What must you leave behind? And from these questions grew a society no longer ruled by fear of forgetting, but by respect for the impermanence of self and the eternity of story. The memory gardens were no longer rare. They bloomed across continents, underwater, in orbit, even on Mars, now greened with bioharmonic. Within each garden, travelers of all species could walk through curated memory echoes, shaped not as cold facts but as emotional truths. You could feel the ache of Kheriis firelight, the thrill of Kheriis breaking gravity, the stillness of the quieting the pulse of the mirror signal. These gardens were not for glory, they were for balance, and into this world was born a child, known only as Ashri, not royalty, not prophecy, just a child. But like Kheriis before her, Ashri had a gift. She did not just remember, she wove. Her dreams were not personal, they were shared. Entire communities found themselves waking from the same vision, the same sensation of weaving light into sky. When questioned, Ashri would smile and simply say, "I was listening." By age 12, she had mapped connections between memory rhythms no neural scholar had ever imagined. By 15, she began composing unwritten songs, melodies meant to be forgotten as they were sung, felt only in the moment of their passing. At 17, she asked a question no one had dared in centuries. If we are part of the weave, who wove the first thread? The answer did not come from Earth. It came from beyond, the edge of mapped space, a signal that felt not like language, nor music, but origin. A pulse, older than the weave, older than recorded memory, encoded not in waves but in absence. The weave was shaken. Civilizations billions of years old turned their attention to the signal's origin, a place where even the weave had never tread, a null zone, where time inverted and consciousness dissolved. It had long been avoided, long believed to be a tear in the fabric of existence, but Ashri insisted they had to go, not to claim, not to colonize, to understand. She was granted a vessel beyond flame, grown from the seed of Kheriis, shaped by her dreams, and powered not by fuel but by collective memory. Volunteers from every corner of Earth, the Uri deeps, and distant weave worlds contributed dreams, regrets, joys, and last words to feed its engine. Ashri piloted it, alone, but she was never truly alone. The ship was alive with feeling, with memory, with love. And so she traveled beyond systems, beyond charts, until she reached the signal source, a place not of form, but origin, resonance, not emptiness, but potential, a 0 point, a mirror with no reflection until she spoke. And when she did, she said only this: "I am from the fire that never died." And the mirror replied, "Then you are home." She did not return, not because she was lost, but because her memory remained, encoded into every garden, every neural vine, every flamelit song. A fourth question was added to the three. What will outlive even memory? The answer was not empire, not technology. The answer was kindness. And so, the civilizations that came after, whether scaled or soft, born of bone or stardust, carried the story forward, of a world that should have died, but instead remembered, of dinosaurs who learned to dream, of mammals who chose to return, of hybrid children who wove the stars together, of memory, flame, and forever.